Superman.
Superman. Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman.
Superman. Superman.
Superman.
Superman is the most recognizable superhero ever. Superman was the one who sparked every other superhero character. But the father of all superheroes has struggled to adapt to modern cinema, even as Marvel movies have reignited superheroes through the Iron Man and Avengers movies. But finally, Superman 2025 has reawakened the character of Superman from the ashes. It's taken a character so many people have never cared about and revived him as an inspiring symbol of hope. And it does that by taking Superman back to what he originally was, an American myth. When people think of myths, they imagine Zeus throwing lightning from Mount Olympus, or the Egyptian god Ra controlling the sun by sailing his boat across the sky. Whatever you imagine, it's probably some wild fictional story that rationally explains natural events. Myths are just rational, fictional stories of the past, right? But that's not exactly what myths are. Here's how Merriam-Webster defines a myth. A usually traditional story of ostensibly, really fancy word there, historical events that serve to unfold part of a worldview of a people or explain a practice, belief, or natural phenomenon. The key phrase here is unfold part of the worldview of a people. Myths aren't just fantastical explanations for why it rains or why earthquakes happen. Myths are also foundational stories that embody a group of people. Myths are stories that groups of people pull their identity from. And yeah, myths are also stories that help us understand the world around us. Myths did attempt to explain natural events, but more importantly, they also serve to explain eternal truths and explain why society is the way it is. An example of that is the famous Greek myth of Icarus. Everyone's heard of the phrase, don't fly too close to the sun, and that comes from the myth of Icarus. The myth is about two Greeks, a father and a son, who have been imprisoned up in a high tower by King Minos, who rules over the island of Crete. Daedalus, the father, is a brilliant inventor, and King Minos has imprisoned him because he helped Theseus defeat the Minotaur. But one day, Daedalus resolves to escape, and he comes up with a plan to use wax to bind together feathers to build wings big enough to carry a man. He spends weeks slowly gathering wax from candles and feathers from, well, birds. And eventually, he's gathered enough wax and feathers to build a pair of wings for him and his son. And Daedalus begins to teach his son how to use them. Finally, the day of their escape comes, and they both take off from the tower. And successfully, they're able to escape and begin to fly home across the ocean. Daedalus tells his son not to get too close to the water, or the wings will get wet and bring them down, and not to fly too close to the sun, or the wax binding of their wings will melt. But Icarus doesn't listen, and he flies higher and higher, enthralled by his new ability to fly and trying to imitate the gods, until finally, the sun's heat melts the wax holding together his wings, and Icarus falls tragically into the ocean. Side note, I'm not gonna lie, this is a really scary myth to write about, considering the fact that I'm writing this 30,000 feet above the ground in an airplane right now. So did ancient Greeks really believe that years before them, a father and son had actually learned how to fly, and one of them fell out of the sky? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Whether the story actually happened or not isn't the point. The lesson is the same. Don't push your limits. So myths aren't exactly about giving an accurate description about reality. It's also about explaining the human condition. Myths are a way to pass truths and ideals down to future generations through storytelling. And that's why myths play a key role in building communities and civilizations. Countries aren't physical things that you can reach out and grab, and that's where myths matter. Myths summarize the identity of a group of people. Myths usually explain a people's origin, like how the Greeks believed that they all descended from Helen, and why the Greeks referred to themselves as Hellenes. But myths also explain a people group's values and who they want to be. Myths still live on today in corporate America. Many companies are built around myths. Apple and a lot of Silicon Valley companies are built around the myth of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak building revolutionary technology out of a garage. It embodies the spirit of bold outsiders challenging the established order and driving innovation. But outside of businesses, myths have almost seemed to disappear from modern life, and one man had a problem with that. Okay, it's 1938, and Europe is on the verge of war. In England, there's J.R.R. Tolkien, who was obsessed with mythology and languages. He was a devout English Catholic and realized two things. One, England lacked a real English mythology, and two, that morality was on the decline. So he looked to the power of myths to revive morality through the power of storytelling. In a lecture he gave called On Fairy Stories, he explains how myths have the power to change us. Tolkien believed that myths can immerse us in a parallel universe where the magical, or the unreal, is suddenly real and normal. But even though the universe is unrealistic, it deals with realistic truths about our own universe.
The witch knew the true meaning of sacrifice. She might have interpreted the deep magic differently.
And so, when we leave the immersion and return to our universe, we see it in a whole new light. The story ignites and reawakens something deep inside of us, and the magical reality of the myth bleeds through into our world. What might have been impossible now becomes possible through the lens of the myth. And that's what inspired Tolkien to write his greatest work, a mythology rooted in English history, and what's been considered one of the greatest pieces of literature of the 20th century, The Lord of the Rings. And at the same time Tolkien was starting to create his mythology for England, two Jewish teenagers were creating what would become an iconic American myth. So in Cleveland, Ohio, there's this kid, Jerry Siegel. He goes to Glenville High School and meets Joe Shuster, and they have a lot in common, and the two become friends. They both come from Jewish immigrant families, and they both love drawing comic books, so they start making comic books together. One day, they create a villain named Superman, but they later change him into a hero who's fast and can fly, inspired by Jerry's fantasy of flying as a kid. Jerry's wife, who would go on to be the model for Lois Lane, believed that the creation of Superman was partially inspired by the death of Jerry's father. When Jerry was young, his father had died of a heart attack during a robbery of the family store. Superman was based a lot on Jerry Siegel himself. He was the model for the early drawings of Superman, and even Clark Kent's job as a reporter was Jerry's dream job as a kid. But even though the two comic book creators had successfully sold multiple comics to publishers in the past, they had trouble getting anyone to pick up Superman. Eventually, National Publishing would take Superman. They were looking for comics to put in their Action Comics comic book they were creating to complement their Detective Comics. Jerry and Joe would sell Superman and everything connected to the character for $130. And so, on April 18th, 1938, Superman debuts in the first edition of Action Comics, and it was an instant success. It was so successful that Timely Comics would create Marvel a year later, and they would become DC's rival for years to come. One reason Superman was so popular was because it gave hope during the Great Depression. But another reason Superman became so popular was because Jerry Siegel tackled issues that were relevant at the time. For example, in the 8th issue of Action Comics, Superman takes on young robbers and learns that they're trapped in a cycle of poverty. And so, he demands that the city of Cleveland build affordable housing for them. Superman has always been a symbol of hope for the hopeless, and that was solidified really early on in Superman's history.
Today comes another such mighty moment, as Hitler's bomb bursting finally carries Nazi expansion across the borders of Germany into the land of his birth. As officials pull down the front...
You see, in 1938, the Nazis had come to power in Germany, and had just annexed Austria a month before Superman's debut. Since Hitler's rise in 1933, the Nazis had slowly stripped the Jews of their rights, and in November 1938, Jews across Germany were robbed of their businesses and synagogues, and thousands would begin to be shipped off to the first concentration camps. Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were both sons of Jewish immigrants, and were obviously appalled at what was happening to their people. And so Superman became a superhero who fought Nazis and stood up for helpless, persecuted Jews. This inspired other Jewish comic book artists to do the same, and one of them was Jack Kirby. Jack would go on to create Captain America, who would be introduced in 1941. Kirby himself would later become known as the King of Comics, and would collaborate with Stan Lee and create iconic superheroes like the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, and Black Panther. Superman directly and indirectly inspired a whole new genre of storytelling, and created a new myth for Americans. Superman showed that Americans didn't just stand up for freedom, but stood up for the helpless, fought against oppression, and protected the weak. And because of this, Superman would inspire generations, and become one of the most recognizable characters all over the globe. But recently, Superman and the rest of DC has really struggled to find a place in the modern world. Overall, Superman is a really hard character to write for. He's literally a perfect person. He's attractive, strong, and morally upstanding. And everyone already knows he's gonna win in the end. Actually, one reason why Jerry and Joe had such a hard time getting people to pick up Superman back in 1938 is because publishers thought that people couldn't relate to a flawless character. But if done really well, Superman has the potential to tell an incredible story. And Superman 2025 does that, and I think embodies the myth of Superman really well. Superman 2025 begins with Superman beaten up and bleeding in the snow, and we learn that he's just lost a fight for the first time. We slowly learn that he's been beaten up by one of Lex Luthor's creations, and that Lex has a plan to finally get rid of Superman. And here we see two main characters, two people who have been given incredible power. Superman has raw superpowers. He has super strength and speed and the ability to fly. Lex has worldly powers. He's rich, he's intelligent, and he's at the head of a massive corporation that has billions of dollars of resources at his disposal. But how do they use their powers? Superman believes that he's been chosen, and that he's on a mission to protect humanity and the lives of every individual. He knows that he's been given incredible powers, and he chooses to use them to help others in need. But Lex, on the other hand, succumbs to jealousy, vanity, and greed. Instead of using his vast wealth and unmatched intelligence to help others, he's driven by envy to take down Superman and stroke his ego with personal ambition. So, out of pure jealousy and ego, Lex launches his plan to take down Superman. One of the first things we learn is that Superman has recently gotten into hot water because he got involved with a military conflict. One Eastern European hellhole of a country decided to invade its neighboring fellow backwater country. Superman, the symbol of justice and peace, intervened and stopped the invasion. But even though he stopped a war and saved lives, it's gotten him dragged through the mud. The invading Soviet wannabe country was an American ally, and Superman's actions have put that alliance in jeopardy. And now people are worried that Superman, a powerful but unelected individual, is becoming an uncontrollable threat. But Lex, also a powerful, unelected individual, steps in to save the day. He goes to the US Department of Defense and pitches them his new superhuman soldiers that, unlike Superman, he and the government will be able to control for the right price. Here we begin to see that politics blurs the lines between good and bad. Only through the eyes of politics can saving lives and fighting for peace be considered a bad thing. But then Lex takes his plan further. He raids the Fortress of Solitude and discovers the message Superman's parents had given him, and is able to recover the last part of the message, which had been damaged when Superman landed on Earth, and Lex leaks it to the press. The recovered part of the message, which Superman never knew about, reveals that his parents planned for him to conquer Earth and rule as a king with a harem of women. This turns the public against Superman, and the worst part is that it's all true. Lex didn't even need to make any of it up, but he twisted the truth. And this shows the problems with cancel culture and how easily public opinion can change. It shows how the truth can easily be twisted to be a bad thing. We see how people feed on drama and believe the worst about people, even good people who have done nothing wrong. Superman has gone from hero to villain overnight. Superman has been given every reason to become a villain. Even though he's given everything to stand up for the helpless, he's been demonized by almost everyone he stood up for. Why should he choose to do good when all he gets in return is suspicion and hatred? But despite every reason to return to hatred and turn evil, Superman still chooses to do good. He chooses to suffer for the good of humanity and surrenders himself to the government, knowing that they'll ultimately hand him over to Lex. This act of good places Superman right into Lex's hands, who's just made a deal with the government to hold Superman. And in prison, Lex tortures Superman with kryptonite and kills a man who interacted with Superman for 2 seconds. But it's ultimately Superman's goodness that moves his jailkeeper to help him break free. And instead of taking revenge on everyone for being mistreated, Superman still chooses to do good. And here, Superman, the movie, shows one of its key lessons, that we must always choose to do good, even when those around us don't deserve it, even when we've been severely mistreated. We see in the movie how Superman's goodness hasn't been forgotten by everyone. It's Superman's choice to do good, even when he can't seem to win, even when he suffers for it, is what inspires others to do the same. The man Lex kills was willing to give his life for Superman because he believed in him, and he believed that giving his life was the least he could do to repay what Superman had done for humanity. Even though Superman is seen as a villain in the eyes of society, and Lex is seen as the hero in the eyes of politicians, it's Superman that people call on when they're at their weakest. When that backwater country is threatened with invasion once again, and tanks and soldiers start massing at the border, and they can only stand there with nothing more than pitchforks to stop the coming invasion, it's not Lex they call on to save them. It's Superman. But I don't think it's just a call for Superman himself. I think it's also a call for someone like Superman. Someone with Superman's ideals to come and save them. Someone who's willing to stand up for people with no one to turn to. Whether that's Superman himself, another country willing to intervene on their behalf, or in the case of the movie, other superheroes. So yeah, Superman is a completely unrealistic movie. From the events of the movie to the characters themselves, but its story, its truths teach us what it really means to be a superhero. Superman shows us that being a superhero isn't about having superpowers. It's about using the powers we do have to help other people. Being a superhero means standing up for others, not just yourself. Being a superhero means choosing good, even when it's not popular, or even when everyone tries to paint you as a villain. And that's why Superman 2025 works. Recent Superman movies, and movies in general, have mostly been gritty and dark and realistic. Recent movies like Joker and Cruella have all tried to humanize and make villains relatable and reasonable. Modern media has blurred the line between good and bad, putting evil in good people and good in evil people. And that's not always a bad thing, and it expands people's perspectives and can make people feel more empathetic for those around them. But Superman 2025 returns to what the genre of superheroes was supposed to be, a mythology. Stories that teach and inspire us. Superman isn't a superhero who questions his identity, who's careless and lets people die. He's a beacon that inspires us to be what we should be. Superman is supposed to be unrealistic. Superman is supposed to be the reality that humans should strive for, not the reality that humans are. And I think it's now more than ever that actual superhero movies are needed.
And good evening. Tonight, a new chapter in this era of political violence.
The world today is filled with negativity and bad news. On the news, there's always wars, divisive politics, and natural disasters.
The Philippine Coast Guard racing to save fishermen trapped inside their capsized boat.
Our entertainment is filled with shows and movies about violence or gritty reality or morally gray characters.
Thought of toxic masculinity.
Why is society overly
feminized.
They're, the Andrew Tates of the world.
Most men are basically invisible.
A part of toxic masculinity ideology.
I see a backlash against masculinity.
Men are suffering a masculinity crisis as society is asking, what should masculinity look like today? Superhero movies like Superman mark a hopeful future where superhero movies aren't just entertainment, but actually have impactful messages that inspire us to do good in the world. Unrealistic, mythological movies that inspire people to make superheroes real and present within our own world.